it's really wonderful to be down here in Melbourne. But before we start our presentation, I, on behalf of Loretta and our people up in Guugu, Yimithirr country, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri peoples of this land, their past, present and future members of that tribal nation. And I'm very thankful that we can talk about our history and our culture on this land. So I acknowledge being here as an Indigenous person.
Thank you, Alberta. And now I'd like to invite Loretta to come to the stage to give the presentation.
Remind me that we haven't drawn the raffle.
I'm not ready either.
Yes.
So while we're ready,
It's blue ticket number D69. No name. Blue D69.
Whoever came after me.
oh, you're 68.
Yes. And I've got 67.
I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you, Kerry, for those lovely introductions, but I just needed to say that I didn't do everything. Alberta has always been there, and there are other people who are there to help us do the Cook research, and although we were the ones out the front, we worked together as a team, and that's what our theme is: two cultures as one people, working together for our future benefit, for the benefit of our community. Before we commence, we'd like to advise that there are images of Aboriginal people in the following presentation, and although we have permission from the Wurundjeri people to use these images, some of them may offend some people. I think Kerry's already given us an introduction. I'm the president of the Reenactment Association, and Alberta is the vice president. We are both unlettered historians, and having conducted a vast amount of research on our subject, we're now ready to share the Endeavour River story. This is a very thought-provoking story, and parts of it may surprise and possibly even astound you. And it all has been discovered after conducting a considerable amount of research locally, and also gleaned from the journals of Cook, Banks and Parkinson. This is our shared story, the story of the events which occurred at the Endeavour River in 1770, when Captain Cook and the 86 men on board the Endeavour were there for 48 days. We appreciate the assistance and encouragement of the many people who've given us the enthusiasm to examine our history in more detail. In particular, Mr. Eric Dirrell, who is now deceased, and Mr. John MacDonald, who were the two people to first research the subject and pass on to us the enthusiasm to continue. We would like also to acknowledge the people who made it financially possible for us to be here today. And in alphabetical order, the Alive Discount Pharmacy in Cooktown, the Captain Cook Society, Cookshire Council, Cooktown Bowls Club, Cooktown Chamber of Commerce, the Federal Member for Leichhardt, Mr. Warren Edge, and Graduate House. Thank you all very much. Kerry said they've done nothing, but they have. They let us stay in this beautiful room upstairs. It's fabulous. I will tell you the story we found of the explorers' journals, and Alberta will tell you the story from the bomber perspective. The first image that you see there is our logo, and I believe it is very unique, and we really feel it represents us. It was developed in collaboration by the members of the Cooktown Reenactment Association with the assistance of local Indigenous artist, Mrs. Helen Gordon. It shows a careened Endeavour on the southern bank of the river with the two Aborigines in a canoe who made the first contact with Endeavour's crew in the foreground. I hope you can all see it, but you have got information on your table with a more of a close-up of it. The scene is encircled by a compass and a fleur-de-lis. It depicts the story of our shared history and cultures and how we work together for the mutual benefit of our whole community. That's what it's all about. We weren't sure whether to put Captain Cook and the Yimithirr first or whether to put the Yimithirr and Captain Cook first, but I thought, well, I'll start and Alberta will follow up with the Yimithirr story. This is the current view of the Endeavour River from Grassy Hill. Captain Cook and Joseph Banks climbed this hill in 1770 in search of a safe passage through the Great Barrier Reef. Cook was to later describe what they saw from this vantage point as a labyrinth. I mean, you can't see the labyrinth there, but that's the land view. The ocean view is difficult to show because the reefs are all under the water and all you can see is water. Many locals and visitors make the regular pilgrimage to Grassy Hill to enjoy this magnificent 360-degree view and unbelievable sunsets while enjoying champagne and nibblies. It's important to look at the men who took part in the Endeavour voyage and discover a little bit more about them. The captain, James Cook, was born the son of a day labourer on the 27th of October 1728. I believe that a lot of you already know some of this information, but I'm just giving it. Those are the Cook tragics, I believe, and this is basically for the benefit of others. He was destined to become one of the most admired men of his time, an admiration which continues to this very day. Cook joined the British Merchant Navy as a teenager and later the Royal Navy. He saw action in the 7 Years' War and subsequently surveyed and mapped much of the entrance of the St. Lawrence River during the Siege of Quebec. This brought Cook to the attention of the British Admiralty and the Royal Society, which led to his commission in 1768 as commander of HMB Endeavour at the age of 40. It's said that the map of the Pacific Ocean is the greatest memorial to Captain Cook. 245 years ago, the Pacific was totally unknown, though it occupied almost half the terrestrial globe. Its treacherous waters, hidden reefs and sunken islands, often swept by sudden tempest and typhoons, was less well known to Western men when Cook first entered it in his Whitby-built cat Endeavour than was the face of the moon when astronauts first descended from Apollo 11 in 1969. The main point of difference being that Cook managed to ply the vast oceans of the globe with no support from ground control. Cook was to embark upon 3 epic voyages around the world within a period of 11 years, meeting his untimely death in Hawaii on the 14th of February 1779. During his 3rd voyage, when he became involved in an altercation with the natives of Hawaii, and before his crew were able to intervene, he had been killed. Some parts of his body were returned to the crew of Adventure and buried at sea. His men were shocked and saddened by the loss of a man they had come to admire as the greatest seaman ever to sail the seas. Now, the next man there is young Joseph Banks. And he was born with the proverbial spoon in his mouth. He entered the world in London on the 24th of February 1743 to a wealthy Lincolnshire country squire and member of the House of Commons and his wife Sarah. He was educated at Harrow School and later went to Eton College. As a boy, he enjoyed exploring the Lincolnshire countryside and developed a keen interest in nature, history and botany. At the age of 21, after his father died, he inherited the impressive estate of Reef Abbey in Lincolnshire. His interests centred around natural history, and while on a visit to the British Museum, he met Daniel Solander, who was a student of Carl Linnaeus. As Banks' influence increased, he became advisor to King George III and urged the monarch to support voyages of discovery to new lands, hoping to indulge his own interest in botany. In 1766, Banks was elected to the Royal Society, and in the same year, at 23 years of age, he went to Labrador and Newfoundland with a view of studying natural history, where he documented 34 species of birds, including the great auk, which became extinct in 1844. Banks was appointed a joint Royal Navy, Royal Society, Banks was appointed to a joint Royal Navy, Royal Society expedition to the South Pacific Ocean on HMB Endeavour 1768 to 1771. While in Brazil during the Endeavour voyage, Banks recorded the first scientific description of the bougainvillea, which is now a common garden plant. While in Australia, his botanical team identified the first major collection of Australian flora, describing many species new to science. Banks took with him his botanical friend Daniel Solander, artist Sidney Parkinson, Dr. Herman Sporing, secretary and draftsman, Alexander Buchan, landscape artist, 4 servants, Peter Briscoe, John Roberts, Thomas Richmond and George Dalton, and 2 dogs. He also took a vast array of specimen jars, artist supplies, and all types of paraphernalia deemed necessary for his voyage of discovery. Banks also brought with him his own little boat, which he often took ashore whenever the ship was near land. The total personal cost of this venture was in the region of £10,000 at the time, and he was 25 years of age when he commenced the voyage. I can't really hazard a guess as to what £10,000 would be in today's money. The botanist was Daniel Solander, and I don't have an image of him up there at the moment. He was born in Sweden on the 19th of February 1733. He enrolled in Uppsala University in 1750 and studied languages and humanities. His professor of botany was the celebrated Carolus Linnaeus, who was soon impressed by young Solander's ability and persuaded his father to allow him to study natural history. Solander travelled to England in 1760 to promote the new Linnaean system of botanical classification. He became an assistant librarian at the British Museum from 1763 onwards and was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1764, later holding the position of Keeper of Printed Books at the British Museum. In 1768, Solander and his assistant, Herman Sporing, were employed by Joseph Banks to join his scientific team on Cook's first voyage to the Pacific Ocean on the Endeavour. These were the botanists who inspired the naming of Botanist's Bay, later to become Botany Bay, the first landing place of Cook's expedition in Australian waters. Solander was vital to the success of the botanical team for his ability to recognise and identify existing plant species, and in describing this important collection of Australian plants. Am I making that noise? He was 35 years of age when he commenced the Endeavour voyage. Now the artist was young Sidney Parkinson. He was born in not 19 anything. He was born in 1742 into a family of Quakers. An honest and pious young man who was employed by Joseph Banks to join the team of naturalists on Endeavour's circumnavigation of the globe. He was one of 2 artists taken on the Endeavour by Banks, but had to carry out the majority of the work when the young artist Alexander Buchan died not long into the voyage. Parkinson himself was never to return to England, as he was also to die from malaria after leaving Batavia at the age of 28. During the voyage of the Endeavour, Parkinson's work included over 900 drawings and 250 watercolours, which resulted in almost 700 engraved plates, with over 300 Australian species represented. The copper plates of the botany discovered during the voyage disappeared for almost 200 years and were later discovered and finally published as Banks' Florilegium in 1989. Joseph Banks was an extremely rich and ambitious young man who surrounded himself with all the people and tools necessary for his success on the Endeavour voyage. The skills of botanist Daniel Solander and artist Sydney Parkins were vital to the success of Banks' botanical endeavour. These were the men who carried out the majority of the work to amass this amazing collection of botanical specimens and illustrations, and they should be given just recognition for their efforts over their arduous 3-hour voyage on the Endeavour. Banks should rightly be recognised as the person who provided the opportunity for this great botanical collection, but those almost forgotten from the equation are Solander and Parkinson, whose blood, sweat and tears were shed in bringing this amazing collection of botany to the world. Parkinson was 26 years of age when he joined the voyage. Talk about the landings now. We've identified 13 landing places made by the Endeavour on the eastern Australian coastline. The first landing was in present-day New South Wales waters at Botany Bay. The other 12 landings were in present-day Queensland waters. In addition to the 13 landings, Cook also named 120 other landmarks on the east coast, making a total of 133 places named by Cook in 1770. Only 27 of these places are in present-day New South Wales waters, and the other 106 are located in Queensland. Many of these names are still in use today and would be very familiar to the audience, such as Port Jackson, Byron Bay, Mount Warning, Point Danger, the Glasshouse Mountains, Keppel Island, Whitsunday Islands, Magnetic Island, Green Island, Trinity Bay, Cape Tribulation, Thursday Island and Horn Island. The first landing place was made on the 29th of April, 1770 at Botany Bay. After leaving New Zealand, Botany Bay was where Cook's nephew Isaac Smith stepped ashore on Sunday the 29th of April. The men fished, explored, found water for the crew and grass for the animals, and Banks and Solander botanised. The Indigenous people at this place did not want to interact with the crew, despite great efforts on Cook's part to make contact on a number of occasions. The Aborigines let these intruders know in no uncertain terms that they were not welcome, sending many a spear and dart towards them. Some of them were taken by the crew, who left unwanted beads, cloth, etc. in place of them. Cook at one stage fired a musket loaded with small shot at 2 of the natives, who still persisted even after one of them was struck in the leg. Banks and his team of scientists were in raptures, spending as much time as they could ashore gathering many exciting new plant specimens. Endeavour departed Botanists Bay on the 6th of May, 8 days after her arrival there, and headed north. This was the first of the 13 landings on the east coast of Australia, and the only landing in what we now know as New South Wales waters. All the following landings were in what are now Queensland waters. On May the 23rd, Endeavour was anchored at Bustard Bay, which is called the town of 1770 now. They stayed one night on the ship. They went ashore and shot a good-sized bustard, and after which the place was named Bustard Bay. 27th of May, they were anchored at Thirsty Sound. Cook landed here searching for water, but not a single drop could be found. Banks was much enthused with the billowing clouds of butterflies, beautiful lorikeets, shells, and a very singular phenomenon, a mud skipper. They spent 2 nights on board the ship while anchored here. The 8th of June, Banks and Hicks went ashore at Cleveland Bay, which is near Magnetic Island, looking for coconuts, but they were very disappointed that the trees they sighted were cabbage palms. Looking forward to yummy, juicy coconut. 10th of June. A lot happened on the 10th of June, 1770. The Endeavour landed briefly in a bay north of Cape Grafton, which is near the Aboriginal community of Loretta. While anchored here, Cook sighted an island in the distance, which he named Green Island. He described a large but not very deep bay, which he later named Trinity Bay, which is now Cairns. June the 10th, 1770, the Endeavour struck the Great Barrier Reef on a clear, moonlit night. Cook names Cape Tribulation and later writes in his journal, "Because here began all our troubles." Although not a true landing place, this entry is included to inform the audience when this encounter with the reef took place. 17th of June, the Endeavour limps its way into the Endeavour River. The Endeavour spent 48 days, almost 7 weeks here, the longest and most significant land base during Cook's East Coast expedition. After departing the Endeavour on August the 5th, another 7 landings were made, and they are at Point Lookout, Lizard Island, Eagle Island, Turtle Group, Providential Channel, which was a reef landing, and Possession Island, where Cook took possession of the east coast of New South Wales in the name of King George III. There was one more landing on Booby Island in the Torres Strait before Cook left Australian waters, heading for a refit in Batavia. This is Endeavour Reef. It's a depiction by a local artist of the Endeavour on the reef. The Endeavour hit the Great Barrier Reef on a high tide at around 11 p.m. on June the 10th, 1770, on a clear moonlit night. Cook had to be aware that he may have been in treacherous waters, but for some reason chose to sail on at night, the leadsman all the time calling the depths. Banks describes it well. "We went to bed in perfect security, but scarce were we warm in our beds when we were called up with the alarming news of the ship being stuck ashore upon a rock, which she in a few moments convinced us of by beating very violently upon the rocks. Our situation became now greatly alarming. The officers, however, behaved with inimitable coolness, void of all hurry and confusion. A boat was got out in which the master went, and after sounding around the ship, found she had ran over a rock and had shoal water all round her. All this time the seamen worked with surprising cheerfulness and alacrity. No grumbling or growling was to be heard throughout the ship, not even an oath. So concerned were the crew of their need to work together to survive." This image shows the ship on the reef and the crew jettisoning over 50 tons weight, starting by pumping up the water in the hold. The ballast was then got out and thrown overboard, as well as the 6 deck guns, decayed stores, oil jars, staves and hoops. One of the 6 cannon and the anchor, which couldn't be recovered, now take pride of place in the James Cook Museum in Cooktown, and the other 5 cannon are scattered in locations around the world. The ship was in danger of sinking, and everyone on board would probably drown if she couldn't be floated. It should be noted that most seamen of the time couldn't swim. After finally freeing her after a traumatic 23 hours, she started taking a large amount of water which couldn't be kept under with the 3 working pumps. Even poor Mr. Banks, not being used to physical labour, took his turn, falling down exhausted, as did all the others, after their 15-minute turns at the pump. Finally, a method to save the ship was suggested by Midshipman Jonathan Monkhouse, which was referred to as fothering. A sail to which had been stuck handfuls of sheep's wool, dung and oakum was drawn under the belly of the ship, and to the relief of all on board, the leak was slowed to such an extent that it could be kept under with only one pump. They were saved, and relief was at hand, but now the task remained to find a suitable place to repair the Endeavour. The longboats were sent out, and the master reported a short time later finding a place well suited to their needs, a short distance up the coast. And this is Cook's chart of the Endeavour River. On June 17, 1770, a week after hitting the reef, the Endeavour was finally warped into the safe harbour to effect repairs, but not before running aground on sandbars twice. Nevertheless, they had indeed found a place where they could repair their vessel, and lost no time taking out the stores to lighten her even more and moving her further up the harbour, where she was careened on the beach in the place where we have performed the reenactment of this landing for 55 years. Now the plan to repair her was in earnest, but the 86 men had to be fed, some of whom were already suffering from the first signs of scurvy. It should be mentioned that Cook also had on board sheep, a boar and sow with a litter of piglets, chickens and ducks, all of whom had to be fed and cared for. And don't forget the indomitable goat, who was on her second journey around the world after having previously rounded the globe on board the Dolphin with Captain Wallace. Boats were sent out to catch fish. Land parties gathered greens, and turtle were found to be plentiful on a nearby reef. Cook referred to this reef as Turtle Reef, but now it's called Boulder Reef. This was a bountiful harbour indeed, where the sick quickly recovered from the first signs of scurvy, Cook's mantra at the time being that all the catch was to be distributed in equal shares, no man having more than another. The ship was repaired within a week, but with the winds being unfavourable, they were prevented from sailing until August the 5th, after 48 days, almost 7 weeks later. Now the Botanical Legacy. Banks and Solander's Botany Bay collection included 132 species almost new to science, which is 17% of species known today from the area, and they were collected in 8 days. At Endeavour River, 325 species of plants were collected, and only a small fraction of them were previously known. In 7 weeks, at an unfavourable time of the year, the dry season, Banks and his team managed to collect over half of the species, 55% known to the area today. During the 3-year voyage, approximately 10,000 herbarium specimens were collected. 7,000 are now housed at the Natural History Museum in London, 1,000 housed within Australia, 1,000 in New Zealand, and about 1,000 distributed to herbaria around the world. About 3,000 species were collected, about 110 genera, and 1,400 species new to science, around 900 from Australia. During Endeavour's voyage, Parkinson work comprised over 900 drawings and 250 watercolours, which resulted in 700 engraved plates with over 300 Australian species represented, and which formed the basis for the magnificent Banks Florilegium. I got all those details from the manager of the herbarium at the James Cook Uni, so if you want them verified, you have to talk to him. Now I wonder if you people know what this little chap's called. This is a kangaroo. Or is it a kangaroo? This is the little animal that was sighted at the Endeavour River. It was during their time here that they sighted a strange animal, which Banks described as resembling a gerbil, but much larger. After several sightings, it was finally shot by Master Huntsman Lieutenant Gore. It was marvelled at, botanised, described, drawn by Parkinson, named, cooked, eaten and declared to be fine fare. Therefore, the first sighting of the kangaroo during Cook's voyage was at the Endeavour River. It is also significant to mention that Sydney Parkin recorded a list of Guugu Yimithirr words while he was there, one of which was Kangaroo. The kangaroo wasn't the only animal to be sighted here, and it wasn't a kangaroo actually, but Alberta will probably tell you later it was a wallaby, but we all know it now to be kangaroo. Kangaroo wasn't the first animal sighted here for the first time. The crocodile, flying fox, dingo, possum and several species of fish, birds and shells were also recorded here. A lot of them is made of the botany, but we mustn't forget the zoology. This landscape by Sydney Parkin was sketched during his stay at the Endeavour River. It shows Grassy Hill on the left and Gore's Mount, or Mount Cook as we later named it, on the right. The scene depicts ballast stores, coiled ropes and tents in the centre of the picture, and of course the Endeavour careened on the left while some of the crew are shown rowing a boat in the foreground. All these landmarks are still identifiable today, and we believe this could be the first landscape ever painted in Australia. A lot of first things happen in Cooktown, or at the Endeavour River. Now this is called Reconciliation Rocks. While the first contact between the first peoples of our country and Cook took place at Botany Bay, we believe the first significant contact took place at the Endeavour River during the 48 days that the Europeans were there. While going about the urgent business of repairing the ship, several Aboriginal people were often sighted on the northern shore of the river. But it would not be till the 10th of July that the first true contact took place. That was the day the Guugu Yimithirr paddled their canoe across the river, landed and met with the Europeans for the first time. That was the first of 6 meetings that would occur between Cook's crew and the Bummer during their stay. We've identified this location as the place where the first reconciliation in Australia's history occurred after an altercation between Bummer and Wangara, which is the white people, over ownership of a turtle. Banks recorded, "We followed for near half a mile, then meeting with some rocks from whence we might observe their motions, we sat down and they did so too, about 100 yards from us. The little old man now came forward to us carrying a lance without a point. He halted several times, and as he stood, employed himself collecting moisture from under his arm with his finger, which he every time drew through his mouth." Cook recorded in his journal, "We followed them for near half a mile and then sat down and called to them, and they stopped also. After some unintelligible conversation had passed, they lay down their darts and came to us in a very friendly manner. We now returned the darts to them, which we had picked up before, which reconciled everything." This is an image from the reenactment, which we do every year, and that's our Captain Cook returning the spears to the little old man. That little old man is Fred Dirrell. He's one of the traditional owners from Wynebott, and our Captain Cook is Rick, and he is a builder. We believe that's just the most significant thing that occurred there. Now I'll say Gati Yurangai, Wallumbal Biddiwi, which means come all of you to Endeavour River. Thank you. I'll now call on Alberta to come forward to tell us the story of the Guugu Yimithirr and Captain Cook.
Loretta. Thank you, Loretta. You've all been very attentive. That is the picture of Wallumballabiri, which Cook later named Endeavour River in 1770. One of the things that we as people throughout the world want in adult life is that getting a fair go in life. And I propose through my presentation that the denial for a fair go for Indigenous people began with Captain Cook. I live in a town named after Cook, Cooktown. Our Winewater Munchel was renamed Gores Mount in 1770, then Mount Cook in the 1880s. There are monuments dedicated to Cook. The shire we live in is also called the Cook Shire. And for very many years I could say that Captain Cook really got up my nose. But that all changed about 7 years ago. I was introduced to the Endeavour journals by Mr. John MacDonald, an avid Cook enthusiast, and who had been having discussions for a number of years with my uncle, the late Mr. Eric Dirrell, who was a Yimithirr Wara elder. And their discussions was about the interactions between Cook and the Bummer of the Endeavour River in 1770. My uncle, much to my disgust, also admired the achievements of Captain Cook. And two things he did admire was his great navigational skills. And he also admired his loyalty to his King's Charter to treat the natives right. And he believed that Cook did this on the Endeavour River. To the best of his ability, he did treat the natives right. So reluctantly over this period, I was soon drawn into their circle, and the excitement I felt when I read the journal entries and participated in in-depth discussions about Yimithirr culture and customs. And you know, what I learned compelled me to dig deeper. And Uncle Eric was right. I got to understand and know a true and balanced history of the Endeavour River contact. The purpose for the discussions that we had at first were for personal reasons, but however our attention soon focused on the annual reenactment of the Captain Cook story performed in Cooktown, and it had been performed continuously since 1969. And although our Bumangay, and Bumangay means all of our people, participated in this event, it was very obvious to our people and to the Indigenous population that this reenactment lacked Indigenous content and therefore not an accurate record of history. And our Bumangay were also upset with the notion that Captain Cook had discovered Australia and had discovered Cooktown. But comparing information from the journals to cultural knowledge, we were able to gather evidence that supported our theory that the motives and actions by the Yimithirr people were crucial to the safety of the Endeavour crew and the success of the 1770 Endeavour voyage. The inclusion of the Bummer story in the reenactment has now become our shared history as well. We could all ask our questions, we could all ask several questions that I'd like to address today was, who were the people that Cook met at the Endeavour River? Why was the place, the clanlands of Winewood, a safe haven? Why did our Bumangay keep out of contact for such a long period? And why were Bumangay not hostile towards Cook and his crew. And what was the clash of culture that caused this conflict? The only recorded conflict in the journals. How was this conflict settled? And we could ask ourselves also, why was this contact a meaningful time in history? And how can this knowledge benefit us today? Now, who were the people that Cook met? The map that you are looking at now is a map that depicts the Guugu clan lands. The land of the Guugu people, or the tribal nation, is situated between rivers, two rivers. To the south is the Annan River, which in Guugu is called Yukubacha, and to the north is the Genie River. And within the boundaries of these two rivers, there are 32 clan groups. And we can be sure that the people that Cook met were from several clans of the Guugu tribal nation and from the nearby clans of the Guugu tribal nation, which is to the south. These were the first peoples who lived and survived on these lands for thousands of years and continue to do so today. And how do we know this? Well, the location of the event. This occurred on the Guugu clan land of Winewood. And if your eyesight is really, really good, you can see where Winewood is. It's number 46, just at the top of that river. The direction that Bamangay came from was in the Guugu clan lands of Moombar and Gamay, which are two clan areas across from where Cooktown is situated today. These clans were of the white cockatoo or Wandara totem and shared customary relationships. And in the journals, Parkinson writes the names of 9 men. And it indicated, from these records, it indicates that there was a Guugu Bama from across the Annan River was there. A man from the Vulcan clan, who is my ancestors' clan, was there. And also a man from the Guugu clan area, Dingal, which is in the Cape Flat region, which is about 60 miles from Cooktown. The clan land of Winewood is the southern gateway into Guugu tribal lands and is one of 32 Guugu clan lands. The southern border is Yukubacha, the Annan River, as I said before. The northern border is Walumbalbiri, the Endeavour River, and the western border extends out to an area called Poison Creek, which is about 15 kilometres from Cooktown. The site on which Cooktown is built is in Winewood clan and in the area traditionally called Kangaroo. Now Kangaroo is the name also for the white quartz crystal that is found abundantly in that area. The Society of People, what do we find? Cook wrote in his journal at the end of his journey, they live in a tranquility which is not disturbed by the inequality of condition. The earth and sea of their own accord furnishes them with all things necessary for life. The 32 clan lands of the Guugu tribal nation supported a population of between 30 to 60 people in each clan lands, so it was not heavily populated. The laws of the lands were complex and strict, and this was in order for the land to be sustainable. The Guugu language terms which we find in our vocabulary today, we can find words for restricted areas, which were known as places of Thapul and Thaman. These were places that was protected because there was a special, they were like supermarkets or special breeding places. The laws of kinship and responsibilities is reflected through language. These kinship terms placed every person in society. Kinship laws were complex and important for the right marriage arrangements and also for family responsibilities. And these laws are still practiced in our society today. The society of people are bounded with knowledge about their environment, their spiritual beliefs, and all things necessary for life. An example of scientific achievements are reflected in the Botanical collection by Banks and Sullivan. The botanical specimens were new to Bank. However, the plants that were collected were already classified, named and used by our people. Cooks and Banks noted that the Bamangay showed no interest in any of the gifts that they were given, yet they would not part with anything that belonged to them. And these are just some of the specimens, botanical specimens with their Yimithirr names. This is the Bunday, what we call Bunday. It is a plant that grows up there, and it's really surprising that this was drawn in June and it's in flower, and it doesn't flower until later on now. So it's a beechberry. It's used as a snack food. That plant, that painting there was drawn by Parkinson. This is a lady apple. We call it butaya. It's also a snack food, and it's only one of the plants, very few plants that was cultivated around campsites. This here is a tapaka. It's also a snack food, but the leaves can also be used as a container or a drinking vessel. This here is a mango pine. It is one of the species of plants which we call it Yimithirr, and it was one of the plants that was used to gather fish. The barks and the roots were pulverized, thrown into the water, and it sucked the oxygen out of the water, and the fish floated up so they could be caught easily. And this was a technology that was used by many indigenous peoples all over the world. The plant was found along the rivers where they could be gathered easily for use. This is winewood munchol, and this is where I was saying before, it was first called Gore's Mount in 1770, and Cook. Then it was later renamed Cook's, Mount Cook. But we still fondly call it winewood munchol, and we try and educate everyone to call it winewood munchol. But winewood, it was a safe haven. And the whole of the Wallumbarbiri proved to be a safe haven for Cook and his crew. It was indeed a stroke of good fortune that they landed on the southern banks of the Wallumbarbiri River. And because it was a safe place, the Europeans were able to repair the ship, gather foodstuff, and after 48 days eventually leave these shores. But why was it a safe haven? We must remember that Indigenous society lived by very strong rules and values that were associated with their traditional lands. Winewood was a special place. It was a neutral zone for the surrounding clan groups from the Yimithirr and Yalanji lands. It was a place where disputes were settled, mothers gave birth, initiation ceremonies were performed, and ceremonies were held. There are places within Winewood set aside for these purposes. But Winewood was also a place where the law prohibited the intentional spilling of blood. This knowledge has been passed down through the generations and the sites are known to us today, and that same spirit of sharing exists in Wormwood today. So why were Bumangay not hostile towards Cook and his crew? And I'm going to just name a few of the reasons why they weren't. Because one, they were unsure of who the Endeavour crew's identity, and they wondered whether these strangers were their ancestors returning. They were not hostile because the law prohibited hostility and the spilling of blood on Wormwood. And the Bumangay did not want the Europeans to perish on their land and be troubled by their spirit in the future. The spiritual beliefs of the Yimithirr, or of any religion, I suppose, is very difficult to explain in such a short time. But in the early 1900s, Walter Roth, who was the Aboriginal protector of North Queensland, he published a series of bulletins of North Queensland ethnography. And in his observation, he writes that at Cape Bedford, which was the area where after dispossession our people gathered, he says that a spiritual belief is fixed in a certain vital principle or wawu. Wawu is something inside, and it's associated with breath, a deceased ghost, or a spiritual representation. He further explains that wawu, when it finally ceases to exist, it travels in the direction of the east and enters a white person. And we know this because in the 1900s, this belief was still strong, and Bumangay would often look for resemblance to some deceased person amongst the Europeans, and would often wonder why they had forgotten their Aboriginal ancestors and ancestry. The Yimithirr had such a traditional spiritual belief, and they were awaiting the return of their spiritual ancestors, Milkandur, which is the mast or spur-winged plover, and Kalkarunkel, the red wallaroo or hill kangaroo. And these two living spirits came from the west and travelled to the east. And it was believed that when their wawu returned, these ancestors would not return empty-handed. So when they saw this strange vessel coming in, and they would have asked themselves, could this be our ancestors coming? Because the ship came from the east. Could it be their ancestors? And we believe, or I believe, that this was the principal reason why Bumangay waited and observed the actions of the Endeavour crew before any contact was made. Did Bumma have reason to be alarmed at the presence of Cook? They certainly did have reason. They observed the large quantities of fish, plants, turtles and other food stuffs being taken from their lands without any consultation. The journals clearly established the weight of fish taken and also the number of turtles captured, the amount of vegetation that was taken and the exploration trips that were undertaken. The journals also record that the gifts given to Bumma were of no use or value to them, and they were carelessly discarded along the beach. The condition in which the gifts were found established that customary practice to cleanse these gifts were performed before being discarded, just in case there were sinister motives involved. They had observed the use of the gun and the damage it could do. They saw the pigeons fall from the sky, the kangaroo being shot. And it is possible, very possible, through the trading links that they had heard about the damage that the gunfire could do from the traders who came from the Gulf area. James Cook and his crew landed on the banks of Island Bay, Alberta on the 17th of June 1770. It's recorded that Cook and his mob had seen footprints in the sand, and they had sighted the natives on several occasions, but no contact was made. The ship had been repaired, reloaded and ready to be refloated, when finally, on the 10th July, Bama initiated contact with Cook and his mob. Bank records that on the day of contact, four Indians were on the opposite shore. They had with them a canoe. 2 of them embarked and paddled towards the river and stopped at the distance of a musket shot. They were talking and shouting, often holding up their lances to show that they had weapons, should ill will be showed towards them. They came very close to the ship, and gifts of cloth, nails, paper and beads were given them, which they put into the canoe without showing the least bit of interest. And then by accident, a small fish was thrown to them. At this they showed the greatest signs of joy imaginable. The 2 men returned to the north shore in the canoe and returned with 2 others. Banks writes, they stood all in a row in the attitude of throwing their lances. Tupaya, the Tahitian prince, signed to them to lay down their lances on the ground. They put down their weapons and came forward without them. More gifts of cloths and beads were given. Banks writes, they took the gifts and they soon became easy, only jealous when more than the usual interest was shown in their canoes. So over a period of 9 days, 6 meetings were held. At each meeting, they brought over new people with them to meet the Endeavour visitors. On this occasion, Banks noted that the men's body were painted with red and white lines. He made observations of the ornaments and body scars that were on them. Banks also noted and described their spears, and he described them as single-pronged, and some spears were pointed with the stings of a stingray and bearded with 2-3 strings of a stingray, which made them a terrible weapon. You know, why are these observations significant? Well, the colour red is usually associated with best or excellence. So these men that were chosen to make contact were chosen because they were the best men for the job. The colour white is usually associated with mourning, tribulation and protection from danger. The scars are initiation marks, and this demonstrates that the chosen men were initiated and experienced. In the 1990s, elders confirmed that the spears described in the journals were spears used in fighting. So the fact that these men were willing to lay down their spears demonstrates their intentions to do what was necessary in order to confirm or disprove the identity of the strangers, and also to obey the law of the land. I'm not as agile as Loretta. Loretta mentioned about some of the words, the things that Parkinson had done. One of the wonderful things and a lot of joy that I get from these journals was the word list that was compiled by Parkinson. And I'm sure that he would have, it was compiled with the aid of Banks and also of Cook's. But some of the words that we read here were quite astonishing to me, because in the journals, Banks noted that the Guugu Yimithirr Wada people could speak, that could imitate any words that were spoken by the Europeans. but the Europeans could not imitate any of the words that they heard being spoken by the Europeans. So it was interesting that and that Parkinson could write down the word Bama, which meant he writes down as meaning man. But today, Bama is what we call ourselves, B-A-M-A. One of the things in Guugu, in our languages, the A always makes the sound A, and there's only one sound for one symbol. So the word Bama is a human being, and we in far north Queensland selves refer to ourselves as Bama. Just like the Kuris and refer to themselves in Victoria. We have a word like D-U-N-J-O, Dunjo, and he says father, but the correct spelling was Thunno, and it meant husband. And we go down the list, and he writes this word that means bone, but the spelling was so close to how it is pronounced today. So he did very well in compiling this list. One of the words he did that he did put in his word list was kangaroo. He spelled it K-A-N-G-O-O-R-O-O. And he described it as the leaping quadruped. In Yimithirr, we call that leaping quadruped Kangaroo, and it refers to an old man, eastern grey wallaroo. And it's interesting in Yimithirr culture that there are many species of leaping quadrupeds, and they have everyone is named, not just the husband, it always refers to a wife as well. And I hope I've got a bit more time. Was contact meaningful? According to the Endeavour journals, contact between the visitors and Bama were very meaningful, and Banks reports that they soon became our very good friends. Bama demonstrated the use of the milkbeard or the launching stick and spear, and Joseph Banks was very impressed with the swiftness of the spear. Parkinson compiled a word list, which we see on the screen now, and Joseph Banks observed that any words that they spoke could be imitated by the Bama. The variety of words that were collated demonstrated patience and skill in communicating with the Yimithirr Bama game. Words that are listed were body parts, names of plants and animals, shells, weather features, kin names, and also included assumed names of 9 men. During contact, the Bamangay were still always confused about who these visitors were, and they wanted to examine the bodies of the Europeans, and the Endeavour crew allowed them to do this. So in every entry, just about after contact, they were made to take off. Cook instructed his men to do whatever they wanted them to do, take off their shirts, feel them, because they really wanted to be sure whether they were their ancestors or not. On 18th of July, Yimithirr men boarded the Endeavour for the first time. There were 12 turtles on board. The sight of these turtles caused alarm because it was not the right time to hunt turtles. And 2, these turtles were taken off the coral reef, which is part of the creation story, and out of bounds for hunting. After they see these turtles, the men soon leave the ship. The next day, 10 men returned to the Endeavour. Leaving their spears with 2 young men, the others boarded the ship and demanded the turtles be returned. When their request was refused, the men tried to haul away 2 turtles, but they were stopped by Cook's men. The men soon left the ship, and upon reaching the ground, one of the Bama took a handful of grass and set fire to the grass and set the area aflame. Fortunately, all the stores and equipment, including the gunpowder, was already stowed on board the ship. Only a suckling pig is burned. Whilst the Endeavour crew is attending to the fire, the Bumingay run to a place where some of the crew were washing, and all the nets and linen were laid out to dry. Then a second fire was lit. In the journal, Cook said, then he was obliged to fire a musket shot at one of the instigators. Although the shot was not fatal, blood was spilled on Wormwood land. And it is interesting to note today that in Cooktown you can still see these places, the stream where that washing was laying on the grass to dry. During all this activity, the Guugu Yimithirr men had disappeared into the woods and mangroves. Cook writes in the journal, "They did not go far from us, for we soon after heard their voices in the woods, upon which Mr. Banks and I and 3 or 4 went to look for them, and very soon met them coming towards us. They each had 4 or 5 darts, and not knowing their intentions, we seized upon 6 or 7 of the first darts we met with." In his journal, the men kept on walking, but in his journal, Joseph Banks next describes how this conflict was resolved. And it is interesting to note that this reconciliation was initiated by the appearance of a little old man. He came forward and he carried a spear without a point. He carried out a customary gesture that is called in Guugu Yimithirr Ngalan Gondame, which meant that he collected sweat from under his arms, blew it through his fingers and in the air. And by this gesture, this little old man, he called for protection, and he also demonstrated a willingness to be friends. Cook also wrote in his journals that this reconciled everything, and the darts were given back to the men. We know that this little old man was a Waimbord Wada elder. He had authority to speak for the land and for the people, and he acted for the safety of the people and prevented any further breaking of law on Waimbord. In the final days, although after this, the Bumingay returned to the Endeavour, but they did not accept the invitation to go on board. They sat on the shore for some time, maybe hoping that there would be a change of heart and a turtle returned to them. When this was not forthcoming, they left the scene, never to return. By now, they would have known that the Europeans were not their ancestors. These events did not stop the Bumingay from showing generosity towards the Europeans. Days later, a crew member became lost in the woods and stumbles across 2 men cooking food, and the sailor sat down with them and showed them his knife. The men examined the knife and handed it back to him. The sailor allowed them to examine his body, and being satisfied with this, they sent him away and pointed him in the right direction of the Endeavour when he seemed to be lost. I am sure that the Guugu Yimithirr people were relieved to see that the Endeavour was ready to leave and finally leave their shores. Joseph Banks records in his journal that all the hills surrounding Wallumballbiddy were on fire. For what purpose, we are not sure. It could have been a cleansing ritual, just in case some bad spirits were left behind, or simply to make sure that there would be no resources left for the Europeans to plunder. Cook and his crew were indeed fortunate to complete their journey and return safely to England. However, Cook failed to recognise a society of people that had no use of permanent village sites, nor fences, nor the need to cultivate the land as the Europeans had observed on their journey throughout the Pacific. But we understand also that Cook had no choice but to claim the east coast of Australia for the British Empire. However, he failed to recognise the people of the Cook Yimithirr Nation as owners of this land when he claimed this land on the basis of terra nullius. By doing this, he denied the rights of Burma to a fair go in their own country down to this day. The end.
It was riveting, wasn't it? Just riveting. I just couldn't stop listening and being so much that I didn't know. I'd like to call on the chair of our council, Mr. Reef Watson, to do the closing address, and thank you to both ladies.
He's just getting his notes together.
Well, thank you. We would normally take questions, but unfortunately we're running over time, so I hope you'll appreciate that. But thank you, Loretta and Alberta, for taking us through a wonderful journey of understanding this afternoon. The Endeavour story, or the story that you told today of the 48 days, and the Guugu Yimithirr story, and the 13 landings, is a wonderful story and perspective. And while many of us have heard about, or know, I suppose, our history that we've heard at school about Captain Cook, the other side of the story, and the story of the Indigenous people and the culture and community that existed this land when Cook arrived, I think is still being understood and within Australia today. The first landing, we heard, created uncertainty and perhaps an unwelcome exchange. But there were many firsts. We've heard this afternoon about the first encounter with Indigenous Australians. The first encounter with the land being when the Endeavour hit the reef. The first encounter with flora, investigating the vegetation, and of course the first encounter with local species. The first significant contact, of course, with Indigenous people, and the first reconciliation that occurred from that contact. So a lot happened in 48 days. But then we heard about the apprehension that perhaps existed at that time, and I think it still existed for many years since. The feeling of not having a fair go, and that perhaps started when Captain Cook landed here. But then we heard a story about respect for local people, the building of reconciliation, and that and the Cook and his crew were guided to have respect. But perhaps it was not just the quality and integrity of the local Indigenous people that ensured the safety of the crew, but also the good fortune, pure coincidence, that the Cook crew and Endeavour landed in a part of the shore that was considered to be a peaceful part of the land, and for all sorts of reasons that there weren't a lot of conflicts. And we've heard that the way the Indigenous people at the time greeted Captain Cook and the crew was no doubt crucial to the success of that voyage. It's created or helped us have a better understanding of what really was a well-established culture and society that had a very close relationship and still enjoys a close relationship with the land today. And then we heard that although the voyage had been considered to be a great success, and there'd been many first-time discoveries from that voyage, to some extent we realise that the voyage was only rediscovering what the Indigenous people had already discovered. And I think we'd appreciate in academic terms, if we're writing a thesis today, there'd probably be no thesis, because it was not new knowledge, certainly to the Indigenous people. But despite all that, there was still misunderstanding and altercation. And what really stands out is for reasons that may have been political, that Cook, while he recognised there was an existing culture here and society, it was not well recognised and appreciated at that time. Today, you have assisted us with the daily advancement in our knowledge of a better understanding of reconciliation, the Indigenous people and their relationship with this country. That, I think, helps us to better understand reconciliation, the spirit of understanding and cooperation. And as a community, I think we know we always need to work on, build on better tolerance and understanding of others, other societies and cultures, as we work together to build on a society that's full of hope, peace and happiness. Thank you for a wonderful address. It's been an inspiration. Now, before we close, if you've joined us here for the first time this afternoon, I hope you've enjoyed the experience. And if you have, please share that experience with others, and we always welcome new friends and old. If you're one of our regular attenders, how about if you invite a friend next meeting, and let's see if we can sort of build on our numbers here, and share the experience with family, friends and others, and let's see if we can all bring a friend next month and share what is a wonderful experience of the Graduate Union. I have a couple of presentations. And Loretta and Alberta, if you come up, I'd just like to offer a small token of our appreciation, and we appreciate, of course, you've come a very, very long way to tell the story, and we appreciate your time, we appreciate the significance of the story, and may I say it's a story that deserves to be told and retold, and I wish you all the best in your endeavours. Thank you. Did I say endeavours?
Can I just say that the chair of the board often does those little clever word plays. I don't think that was an accident. I hope you've enjoyed. Please feel free to continue discussions in the Philip Law Members Lounge, and we'll see you next week with friend or 10 each. Except for our lady who's going home.
Next Wednesday, it's different. We're not having